I don't know how many of you have had the experience flying commercially on an airline like Southwest or United or American or all of the other commercial airlines. But one of the things you notice that when it comes to flying in an airplane, the people that you interact with most often once you get up on the plane are the flight attendants. The flight attendants are there to greet you as you get on the plane, help you find your seat, stow your luggage in the overhead bin, remind you of the safety features of this Boeing 747 and all of the emergency exits located over the wings and in the back and in the front. They'll help you get your seatbelt secured and tightly placed along your waist so you're safe for takeoff and landing in any unexpected turbulence. They're the ones who you interact with most often, there for your safety and also for your comfort, perhaps delivering you a tasty beverage and the smallest bag of goodies that you've ever seen before in your life, if you're lucky. You don't spend any time really nowadays when it comes to commercially flying interacting with the guy who's actually flying the plane, the pilot. The only thing you ever hear from him is something like this. "This is the captain speaking. We're now approaching our landing. Here's the weather in Harlingen, Texas. It's 97 degrees, winds out of the south at 37 miles per hour. Normal day in beautiful Harlingen. Please take your seats and prepare for landing," right? I mean, that's the only time you hear from them. You know they're up there. You know they're flying the plane, and they're focused on getting you to the destination safely. Every once in a while, you might hear an announcement mid-flight where they'll tell you, "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. Would you please return to your seats and secure your seatbelt. I'm not a pilot. But secure your seatbelts, and we're going to experience some turbulence here in a little bit, and so we're going to ask the flight attendants to please be seated as well." And they do that because they've heard ahead of time that there's some turbulence coming, or their sensors tell them as such, and so they want everybody to be safe and to get to their destination safely, so they tell you to take their seats. Now, you might have experienced it sometimes, is that even though you know the pilot knows how to fly people safely through the storm, that being a passenger can be quite difficult because you can look out the side of the window, but you can't see ahead. And so in the midst of the turbulence, the only thing you can do is feel the turbulence. You can hear the engine strain. You can watch the wings start to shake. And if it goes on very long, you begin to wonder, why are we going this way? If the captain knew this storm was coming, couldn't we have just gone around it? Does the pilot, does he really know what he's doing? That's where we are in the book of Job right now. Questions. Does God really know what he's doing? And it's the same question that we hear the disciples really ask of Jesus in John chapter 9. Then a whole chapter, I don't know if you got that, that's a whole chapter devoted to this just one story of a man who was born blind that Jesus and his disciples interacted with there in the streets of Jerusalem. And the disciples had a question of Jesus. And the way that they looked at it when they saw this man born blind, the question was this: "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Is it A or B, mom and dad, or this child, this man, sin that caused him to suffer?" And they're doing exactly what Job's friends have been doing in the book of Job. Trying to explain suffering. Trying to speak where God has not spoken. And according to their way of thinking, there must be a clear explanation. Somebody is at fault for this man being born blind. Job's friends had this same view. Suffering has a simple explanation, Job. And for 37 chapters, they've been trying to probe Job's life. God can't be at fault here, Job, so it must be your fault. It must be your own fault. It must be your own most grievous fault, Job, so pour the beans. What'd you do? What'd you think? What'd you say that caused you to experience this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day in which you've lost your employees, you've lost your wealth, you've had to bury 10 children, and now your body is under attack? What did you do? Suffering has to make sense. You must have done something wrong, but as we're going to see, Today and in the coming weeks, God's going to reject this way of thinking. It's what Jesus does in John chapter 9. He replies to their question, and he says to them, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened. The reason this happened is so that the works, plural, of God might be displayed in him. You're asking the wrong question, not who's to blame or what caused this, but what is God going to do through this? It's what God teaches Job. But first, back to that plane analogy. As you've experienced, sometimes a captain of the plane knows that there's going to be turbulence and weather ahead, and they share that information ahead of time with you. But there's other times where the pilot, the captain, is silent, even though there's something wrong. I experienced that a number of years ago. I was coming in for a landing, not here in Harlingen, another airport, but I was coming in for a landing on the plane as a passenger, and all of a sudden, as we were coming in a landing near to the ground, the plane all of a sudden went full engines and took back off and veered to the left to come around for another pass. The captain got on the intercom and said, nothing to worry about, folks. This is your captain speaking. We're going to try that again. Here we go. And he came back in for another landing. This time we touched down. Everything was fine. It was after all of this had happened, the captain gets on the intercom and tells us what happens. Folks, this is your captain speaking. Sorry about that little incident back there. We had a malfunction of our landing gear light in the cockpit. It wasn't working to tell us if our landing gear was actually down. So we did a little flyby by the tower, and they were able to visually assure us that, yes, the landing gear was locked and in place, and we were safe to make a landing. Just wanted to let you know that happened. Captain, welcome to Harlingen. I don't remember where I was at. But I thought to myself, that was probably a good move on the captain's part. If he would have got on the intercom and said, folks, we're not really sure if our landing gear is working here. So just sit back, stay secured, everything's going to be fine. Yeah, right. Everybody be panicking, right? They'd be saying their prayers. They'd be saying the Lord's Prayer. People would be crossing themselves, doing whatever they could because all of a sudden things were out of their control. And they didn't know if they could trust the captain to land the plane safely. He did the right thing, probably, not inciting panic when there was nothing any of us could have done to make sure the landing gear was down. Job has been demanding from his pilot, God, why all this turbulence is going on in his life. And for 37 chapters, Job hears nothing. So his friends fill the gap, right? God's not going to speak, so his friends fill the gap. They start speaking on behalf of God. They start explaining why this is happening to him and dare explain and speak for God. But Job keeps insisting that he's done nothing wrong. And he keeps praying, and he keeps asking, and he keeps arguing. And for 37 chapters, God is silent. But then the captain speaks. In Job chapter 38, 39, and 40. And if you read that, and I encourage you to read it sometimes, when God speaks to Job, he doesn't respond with an explanation. He responds instead with questions. And if you look through it, depending on how you count it, he asks Job 70 questions. 70 questions. Wowzers. Lonnie read some of them. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Who determined its measurements? Who shut the sea with doors? 70 questions asked of Job. Because Job has been trying to sit into the cockpit. He's been trying to fly the plane, but Job can't see what God sees. And it's the same thing in our reading in John 9. The disciples look at the blind man and they say, whose fault is it? Who's to blame? Who's done this? But Jesus is doing something bigger than they can see. Because the blind man's story isn't really about blindness, it's about revealing who Jesus is. As Jesus spits on the ground, as he makes that mud and puts it on his eyes and sends him to wash, and suddenly this man who only knew darkness can now see light. Because Jesus is revealing something about himself. In John 8, verse 12, he declares himself to be the light of the world. He reiterates that we heard in John chapter 9 as well. And now he doesn't just say, I'm the light of the world. He says, look at the proof. It's in the pudding. The blind man received his physical sight, yes. But a more important thing goes on there too. Remember, Jesus said, so that the works of plural God could be revealed in his life. And yes, it was revealed in his restoration or seeing for the first time, but also the gift of faith. That by the end of the chapter, the man says, Lord, I believe. The suffering that looked meaningless becomes the very place where God's work is revealed and saving faith is confessed. That helps us understand Job a little bit. Because the book of Job shows us something even deeper. God never explains to Job the heavenly scene of chapters 1 and 2 that we got to hear about and read about. We get to see that the storm itself is under God's authority. He is the captain flying all along. Yes, Satan was given a limit, but there was still a limit that God had placed on him, because even suffering is not outside his control. Therefore, the storm doesn't get the final word. God does. And there's no place clearer than the cross for that truth. Because there at the cross is another moment where people looked at suffering and they assumed they understood it. Because only those who would be crucified would be the worst of the criminals, the terrorists, the others who would be hung up there by the Roman government in order so that others would say, don't do what they did, or you're going to wind up like they did too on your own cross. But yet we know Jesus didn't deserve that cross. We deserved that cross. But at that moment, God was doing the greatest work in history. St. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5, God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. Reconciling the world to himself. Not us reconciling ourselves to God. We couldn't do it. God had to do it in our place. And on the cross, which looks like defeat, was actually salvation. What looks like abandonment was actually redemption. The greatest storm in history becomes the place where God reveals his love. So what does this mean for us today? It means if you are in a storm right now, or there's a storm coming, you're probably never going to get the explanation you want. You may ask, why this illness? Why this loss? Why this grief? Why this struggle? Why this loneliness? Why this pain? And sometimes you get an answer. But in the midst of getting an answer to the question why, God always gives us something better than answers to that question. He shows us who he is. The God who laid the foundations of the earth. The God who opens the eyes of the blind. The God who enters into the storm of humanity through Jesus Christ is the one who died and rose for you. And that means you're never alone in the storm. That image on the screen, it looks rather chaotic. It looks like a mess. And if you can see it closely enough, you would notice that they're actually real threads. You'll see some knots in there, some loose ends. You see some colors that don't seem to match. Nothing makes sense. Chaotic. Looks unfinished. Looks like someone made a mistake. But what you're seeing there is the backside of the image. On the front side of this mosaic, you'll see the bigger picture of the tapestry as it was intended to be seen by others. Then everything changes. Now you see a pattern. Colors that come together. Knots that have a purpose. The threads have formed a picture. What looks random was actually intentional. What looked like chaos was actually design. Friends, most of us live our lives on the backside of the tapestry. It's where Job was living. It's where the man who was born blind was living. tangled threads, loss, blindness, suffering, questions. But God sees the front side, the whole design. And one day when Christ returns, we will too. But until that day, we join Job in saying, after God asks him 70 questions, he'll say this, I know that you can do all things, and no plan of yours can be thwarted. I know. I don't understand, but I know. And one day we'll see how all the storms we feared, the prayers we didn't understand, the tears we cried, are all woven in the hands of a loving God. So that when we only see the tangled threads, we trust the one who's weaving the tapestry. The storms will hit, grief will come, illness will attack, loneliness will be deep, guilt overwhelming, even storms that only we know about. But the message of Job is this: you're not the pilot. You're not the pilot. And that's good news. Because the one who's flying the plane laid the foundations of the earth. The one who is guiding your life commands the stars. The one who governs the universe is the same one who went to the cross for you, and his promise is sure. He's washed you in the water and the word of your baptism, declaring you as his beloved son, his chosen daughter. In a moment, he's going to come and meet you here at his table with his very body and blood as his words and promises declare, and he will feed you and assure you you are forgiven. The chaos feels real. The storm is overwhelming, but I'm here with you, in you. Taste and see the Lord is good, and he is for you. He'll get you through the storm, and one day he'll bring you safely home. So what do we do in the middle of the storm? We don't need to panic. We don't need to get desperate. Don't try to grab the controls. Instead, sit down, buckle up, and trust the pilot. Especially when he gets on the intercom and speaks to you. And he doesn't have to do it this way. He's already done it this way. His very word, spoken, written for your sake, so that in the midst of the journey, you can trust the captain, the one who opens the blind eyes, the one who goes to the cross, the one who promises to bring you through every storm and to finally bring you home. So listen to your captain speaking, especially when you can't find your way.